Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from Pro Football Network. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, I will admit that I was wrong to expect Josh Freeman 2.0 tonight, but I don't think the Raiders should be allowed to play another game for the rest of the year.
So two things. One, I just wrote up a piece about the top NFL defensive coordinators that could get a head coach job. And I did not say that Patrick Graham was one of them. Patrick Graham's the defense coordinator of the Raiders. But I did say, okay, so he had a bad year last year with the Giants, and he's having a bad year this year with the Raiders. I will admit that he's not going to get a head coaching job this year. He's my honorable mention. But he is considered one of the smartest coaches in the league. People love him. At some point in the future, he might get considered for a few interviews. The Vikings actually interviewed him, despite how poor that defense was. And now, even though I hedged my bets a bunch of times in that piece, I regret writing it. By the way, so he's considered one of the smartest guys because, obviously, because of the interactions everybody has with him and stuff like that. But like, he gets the Yale bump, right? Because he went to Yale, and everyone's like, "Oh, he went to Yale. He's so smart." Ryan Fitzpatrick on the Amazon postgame show said he couldn't believe that, or rather that Baker Mayfield said that he couldn't believe the Raiders lined up and pressed man on the game-winning touchdown. And Fitz responded with, the defensive coordinator went to Yale.
Well, he went to Harvard. That's
the best Harvard shade I've ever seen in the NFL. That's just incredible.
Oh my God. All right. So typically I try to get into the real show by like the 10-minute mark. We're going to spend a couple of minutes on the game before we do the shilling and all of that, because this just happened. This was objectively hilarious. After the game, I had Morgan Freeman's voice in my head go, two things never happened after that. No one ever took the Raiders seriously again, and McDaniels never coached again. I'm just like, this is so... It's so bad. What's wrong about this is going to encourage another coach to do this, because the Freeman thing scared people off for a while. But like,
well, and there was a history with the Freeman thing, right? Because right before that, when we were talking before the Freeman game, when we recorded that episode way back when, we had mentioned when Carson Palmer went to the Raiders. Carson Palmer, who by the way went to Pro Bowls with Cincinnati before the Raiders and with Arizona after the Raiders. It was very clearly him showing up to the Raiders 8 days later, entering a game and having one of the most disastrous game of his career, right? Like, there's a history with this. And then the Josh Freeman game happened. Somehow it was worse.
Someone was defending the Freeman game to me online, and I was like, I just watched it again. Like, I just...
What does defend it mean?
Well, it was saying that that he just didn't have any sort of chemistry with the receivers that day.
Well, that's the point that we're making.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the point is, like, he shows up, he has no chemistry with the receivers, he doesn't know the playbook. And that's what's crazy about Baker, right? Is that Baker doesn't even know what the cover art to the playbook looks like, much less has had time to crack it open.
He hasn't even had a chance to get DVDs of it that are blank. Like,
right. He didn't get to the last page to see the $100 bill in order to return it.
Exactly.
Like, it's like if you showed him the cover of the Rams playbook and a random cover from Animorphs, and you had to ask him which one is the Raiders playbook, it would take him some time.
They're, they are remarkably similar, to be fair. Except this one has Baker Mayfield turning into a goat. What a... Like, I'm watching the end of that game, and Drawplay David tweeted out something about, you got, 96 yards in less than 2 minutes, become a legend. And my immediate response was something along the lines of, this is going to take all of the pass interference penalties. Here they come. And then immediately after, it's a pass interference penalty. And I'm like, oh no, this is real. This is... And then the taunting penalty, then the knocking the ball out of the hand as he's like, that's another 15. Yeah. And then there was another 15. Just like, the Raiders are going to will this into existence. No one should ever take Josh McDaniels seriously.
It was so wild. And like the thing is, it would be one thing if he was like throwing to like Cooper Kupp, and Odell Beckham would be very funny. I did tweet out that they should bring Odell back.
Absolutely. This is the Rams are a playoff team with Odell Beckham. Come on back.
Yeah, let's reunite. But but it'd be one thing if the Cooper Kupp was on the field, right? But he was throwing to Ben Skoranek and Tutu Atwell, two names that were made up in a Japanese Famicom baseball game, right? Like, no way are those real. Tutu Atwell, get out. Get out.
I'm confident I saw that in Ken Griffey Jr. baseball in 1994.
Exactly. It goes Sleeve McDykel, Tutu Atwell, Ben Skoranek, right? That's the roster that he's throwing to. And Sleeve McDykel was hurt, and so Tutu Atwell had to step up, which is difficult because he's 5'2". Like,
wow.
Okay, he looks smaller than me. Okay, here's
you don't throw height shade very often. I forget you're 7 feet tall, but like,
right? Yeah, it's what it would be bad form because I could do it to everybody.
Yeah, right.
The thing I respect about Tutu Atwell is that he absolutely leans into how tiny of a dude he is. Something I'm very familiar with. Again, not because I'm short; I'm very tall. But let's say I know a guy who is, say, 5'4", and played high school football, and he mouthed off a lot to the coaches, and so they'd make him play against the varsity a little bit too often, and maybe they would make him play on the defensive line because, man, that guy would not shut up. My friend that I'm talking about, who is definitely my friend. He would take advantage of the fact that anything that happened to him would look like a penalty because he's kind of a brat. He knew what he could get away with, and he got away with it. And that's what Tutu Atwell reminded me of. Just a tiny dude running into like a 6'2" safety and then just flopping like Luis Scola, right? Just like his head's back. He suddenly grew a mullet so that it could make it more dramatic, right? Like, absolutely amazing performance from Tutu Atwell to get completely demolished out there on the field and draw some flags. Perfect.
It was remarkable. I cannot believe that Baker Mayfield was able to walk in there and accomplish. And like, the Raiders kept them around. Like, this was not a game where like the Raiders were just dominant. The Raiders kept that offense a lot around.
Yeah, it was like 13-3 for the longest time, and I had taken Raiders minus 6.5. I cited the Josh Freeman game, by the way, in the football machine, right? And I was like, look, I've seen this. I've seen the Josh Freeman game. I know what happens here. It sounds like Mayfield is going to take all the snaps. It sounds like he's going to start. If not, it's John Wolford. I'm not too worried, right? The Raiders, I think, won their last 3 games. I'm like comfortable with this like Rams team that has clearly given up on the season, and the Raiders who have not given up on the season. And it was 13-3 for most of the game, and I was like, okay, I'm going to get the minus 6.5. That's fantastic. And then lo and behold, right? Like it wasn't even that last score that did it. It was the score right before it, right? Because that reduced it to a 6-point game. And the Raiders were absolutely just going to bleed out the clock. There's no way they were going to try to score. I was kind of hoping for like a 90-yard touchdown run from Josh Jacobs, right? Because we saw that against Seattle. And I was like, okay, maybe. It's 3rd and 1, and I'm like, oh, they're absolutely going to punt this. You know what? Screw it. They're not going to go for it on 4th and 1. If they go for it on 4th and 1, they're just going to bleed out the clock anyway. They're not going to try to run. They're just going to punt this. And so I gave up by the time they punted. Sam was like, hey, they could get a pick 6. I was like, no, they couldn't. Have you seen this? No, they couldn't. And if they could, they just go down anyway, right? They wouldn't risk the return where you could maybe fumble it. They would just go down. So even if they got, but then I did get a sliver of hope. I did because the punt was at the 2. I was like, maybe they'll get a safety.
It was a magical punt. That was incredible.
It was so good. It was so good.
As the punt,
the punt gunner was doing the gritty
while the ball was going just end over end perfectly to the 2.
And like the crazy thing was he like wasn't wrong to do it. That's the stupidest part, is that he was 100% in the right to do the gritty, one of the most amazing punts I've ever seen.
It was ridiculous. And then the pass interference penalty, just a little bit here and there. And then admittedly, there was like a dime or two on that play or on that drive from Baker Mayfield. Like he was hitting people. I'm sitting there. Throw. I'm sitting there going, all right, he's basically calling Madden plays at this point. This is either going to be a curl or a go. Like there's no in between here.
Yeah, I just and like all the plays are just like on his wristband. He doesn't like they're probably telling him what he just called in the huddle, right? Like that's. But also, like hold on, John Wolford started the game. Why?
I told you why. They wanted to make sure not to mess up his start record, just in case Baker Mayfield didn't work out.
But his streak was broken because he was starting, and then Bryce Perkins had to start for some reason. So like he didn't even have a streak.
Oh, that's even worse. Okay, I thought they were trying to preserve something a la Eli
sure you
Manning.
Actually thought that. Yeah.
A la Eli Manning. They were just trying to make sure that the start thing worked. That's funny. What a bunch of ridiculousness. Clown shoes. Everyone in that Raiders organization's today. Clown shoes.
Oh my God.
Why do you play that defense on that play? Just
press man, 6-point lead, no deep help. That's like press man is one thing. Like you shouldn't be doing that because it is low reward, high risk. But no deep help. Like it's like when people complain that you rush 3 on Hail Marys, and I get that, right? I kind of feel it, but your response is then to like send 7 instead of just like 4, right? Like
do you remember the Jets play?
Yeah, they accused the Jets of tanking.
Yes,
no, it was the Dolphins. They accused the Dolphins of tanking.
Yes,
and then the best part is there's a lawsuit about the Dolphins tanking.
Yes, as it turned out, they weren't right at that particular moment, but they were right. Just unbelievable. Well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Now that we got all that out of the way, let's talk some Viking stuff. We got a preview of the Lions game with Jeremy Reisman. You know him from previous episodes about the Lions matchup. So we got an interview with him, and we've got the mailbag as well. But before we start, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like to donate to it, help us financially, you can do so a couple of different ways. You can go over to patreon.com/NorseCode and help out there. For $3.50 a month, you get access to stuff like the bonus shows. You get access to the Discord. I will be putting out the Christmas episode here around Christmas. Yes, it will happen this year. It's happening this year. I promise. This year happens in December, not in February like last year.
I mean, that's what you say. I don't know.
I've already started.
Okay, yeah, that means a lot. You're right.
Listen, a session file is open on my computer. That counts for something.
Yeah, you never procrastinate at that point.
No, it's all downhill from here. That boulder is being pushed. But if you'd like the bonus Christmas episode, that will be posted over at Patreon. So Patreon people get at least 2 Christmas episodes this year, possibly 3. We'll see. That third show kind of destroyed me last year, so we'll see.
Yeah.
But you guys get bonus episodes. Check it out over at patreon.com/NorseCode. And be like Casey Kehoe. Thank you so much for signing up over on Patreon. Says, should have joined long ago. Keep it up. Thank you, Casey, so much for your help. And you can go to you can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well if you'd like to make a one-time donation. Or you can go over to norsecode.threadless.com and be one of the cool people over there that buy a baby onesie, buy a t-shirt, get your Arethe Christmas socks over at Threadless. And we did get a couple of sales. We got a sticker, so I think we got like 60 cents. And you know what? That stuff adds up.
I don't know if so on Jeremy Reisman's podcast. Apparently, there's a whole so it's also simulcast onto Twitch as he's recording, and so on the Twitch podcast, apparently all of the viewers want stickers, and they're having like some difficulty figuring out how to get like stickers sold and stuff like that. And it's like a meme where people have been asking for stickers for apparently weeks. And so like they just bother him about the sticker question, and then they ask me to bother him about stickers. So of course, like I oblige, right? And then I bring up like, hey, actually, we have stickers, right? So I say, go to northcoast.threadless.com. Jeremy gets mad at me, and then I write out the URL on the website into Twitch chat, and I send that into the Twitch chat. Then he bans
probably responsible for that, yeah.
To which I said he Streisand affected me, so he unbans me, and so I type it back into Twitch chat.
So you're saying right now that what I should do is go on Twitter because he follows me. Heard you're having some problems with your sticker situation. Let me help you with the sticky situation you appear to have found yourself in. All right, I'm going to do that. Let's go to the interview that you conducted earlier today with Jeremy Reisman and of Pride of Detroit. We'll see if in time for the mailbag.
All right, I'm here with Jeremy Reisman from Pride of Detroit, the co-host of the POD cast. Sorry, I laugh every time I introduce. I love being on the podcast. I love listening to it, but like, bro, the name.
Listen, we were one of the first Lions podcasts out there. We didn't really think it through. We thought it was super clever. We did not realize that calling it the POD cast just means when people search, you just search podcast, and that's not going to find anything.
Yeah, okay. The thing is, I do think it's clever. Like, that's like, there's no... I think it's a good name independent of all of the context of the fact that it must exist in an online space and people need to find it. Like, I like it. But man...
we honestly thought, I think at first, because I think this actually did jump into our minds. We're not complete idiots over there. I think we thought about spelling it out phonetically, like PEEOHDEE, but like then it was just like, okay, no, that's just messy and stupid.
Plus, you'd have P in the name.
True.
That was my first thought. Like, yeah, okay, that's messy, but then there's P in the name.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk Lions. Won 4 of their last 5. The loss was a narrow one to Buffalo.
Yeah.
The team that everyone beats to prove that they're good, I think, is the that's how you know you're a good football team.
Sure.
Is that you play close or beat the Buffalo Bills, who somehow are also still quite good. With that in mind, right, we'll get into the position-specific stuff that I know that you're familiar with and that our listeners love to hear. Hopefully, they haven't given me feedback otherwise about the format of the guest interviews, so we'll assume that it's good. Big picture question: are the Lions good?
Oh boy, a loaded big picture question. Their offense certainly is. I can say with pretty good confidence that their offense right now is good. They've been a top 10 offense basically the entire year, where they're, well, at least when their skill position players weren't, Khalif Freeman as your number 1 receiver.
Right.
So that side of the ball is good. The defense, I know everyone probably just looks at the overall season stats and sees, oh, well, this team is 32nd in scoring, 32nd in overall yardage, things like that.
That's
looks
bad.
really bad. But you look at the last 5 weeks, I think they're 6th in DVOA, in defensive DVOA in the past 5 weeks. So that is getting better, but I don't think the sample size is big enough for me to conclude, yes, for certain, the defense is now good, or at least even okay. So overall, I do think this team is really riding next, like right up to good. But I'm not quite ready to do that just because the sample size is still pretty relatively small. And, some of these games are against a Giants team that was probably a little bit overrated, against the Bears and a Packers team that aren't very good. Bills team, I'm not much of a moral victory guy. The Lions, 2 or 3 years ago, went to the wire with Kansas City and then lost every single game after that. So, and I think that was like a week 4 game. So they went
over a loss. First time I've heard of that.
Yeah, right. And so, they did rebound pretty nicely last week against Jacksonville. But again, Jacksonville, maybe a team that's probably better than their record looks, but not a good team. So I think the barometer is still, we're still working out the kinks there. But
I like Jacksonville. I thought that was a good win.
Definitely. I mean, anytime you beat any team 40-14, that's a good win. I don't care who it is.
Did all right.
So, certainly trending in the right direction. If we can, if I see the Lions string together, maybe even a win in either of these next 2 games, whether it's the Vikings or the Jets, I might officially declare them as good, but I'm too much of a coward to say that yet.
All right, no, fair enough. I understand the cautious optimism intimately, in fact. But we'll get into, because I think both the offense and the defense have changed in character over the last couple of weeks,
Sure.
which might be part of the reason, right? Like it doesn't seem to be its only variance. We'll get into what that looks like defensively. Offensively, it very much seems like they are relying a lot less on just happening to have explosive plays in the run game. In fact, they're relying a lot less on explosive plays generally, it seems like. You've got a very, when we talk about offenses that throw short and we call them efficient. When they throw short and we don't like the offenses, we call them dink and dunk. But they're the same offense. It's just working now. Tell me about it. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I literally asked Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator, about this today, because that game against the Jaguars, they scored on all 8 offensive drives, and most of them were 8, 9, 10-yard or 10-play drives. And I asked him, like, is that something that you actually like? Is that something that, shows that your team can be consistent on every down, mistake-free, things like that? And he says, oh, no, I want the explosive plays. I would rather have a 3-play explosive play drive. Which, that's the answer I actually wanted to hear.
That's the answer I would want. Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Like they haven't been relying on that as of late. They haven't been getting it. With DJ Chark back in the lineup and back healthy, that they landed a 41-yard pass, which I think is either
that pass ruled.
I think it was Jared Goff's longest air yards completion or second longest of the season. So maybe that comes back. Jameson Williams obviously coming back might help with that if Jared Goff can actually throw the ball to catch up to him. But the run game has been missing it since almost the Vikings game. Honestly, they really just haven't been able to break out that long run again, and whether that's due to DeAndre Swift's health or some interior offensive line swaps due to a crap ton of injuries. It's probably a little bit of both, but I don't think this kind of string it out offense is necessarily what they want to do, but maybe just a product of what they're good at right now.
I'll also add that, explosive runs are just so infrequent. Like the teams who do not have running quarterbacks that relied on explosive runs, there were a number of them, right? There were the Jets, there were the Lions, there were the Browns, right? Mm-hmm. I'm sure there was one more. I'm trying to remember. But none of those teams have running quarterbacks, so they cannot create a conflict and create a numbers advantage with the run game that way. And they explode. And obviously the Jets, they lost Breece Hall, but the Browns have dropped off in explosive playmaking. The Lions have as well. I feel like that's just part of the equation, is that sort of thing isn't frequent.
Yeah, I mean, I think this team had 3 or 4 rushes of 50-plus yards in the first 4 weeks of the season. And I think everyone was just like, wow, this is amazing. Let's not get used to it.
Yeah. Well, apparently sustainability talk gets you absolutely murdered here in Vikings land. So we'll move on quickly from that, I guess. But I do want to talk about the running back situation, because DeAndre Swift seems to be completely healthy. Like before, he was healthy enough to play, but it was always a pitch count. Now it seems like you can give him the ball 25 times, either through targets or carries. Is that the case?
Probably. I mean, he was completely off the injury report last week, and now he popped up on it again this week with almost certainly the same ankle, but full in practice on Thursday. So I think the short answer is still probably yes to your question. I don't think they want to give it to him 25 times. I think they probably would rather keep it in the 15 to 20 range, just to make sure he can ride out the rest of the season. But yeah, I think the explosiveness is back. I think the issues with DeAndre Swift are what they've always been, though, beyond just injury and staying on the field. I still think he has a tendency to just want to bounce everything outside. And so that still shows up, but he's still such an explosive player that sometimes that works anyways, even when it's not the right read. So I think they're starting to like him a little bit more as a receiver than a runner. Jamal is still RB1 right now, at least in terms of usage. In terms of touches, it is a little bit more leaning towards Swift now. But again, I think they want to use him in a wide variety of ways when they want to pick up 3 yards on a 3rd and 2. Jamal's going to be in the game.
That sounds good. Let's talk quickly about Jared Goff, because part of that 8 and 9 yard per whatever offense is Jared Goff, who has over the past 5 weeks, I think, a pass rating above 100, maybe above 110, something like that. Crazy. Is this so? Obviously, when we last talked, You mentioned that Ben Johnson brought in a lot of offensive concepts from what the Rams did successfully with Goff, and that was part of the conversation they had. Now, like you mentioned, there isn't that much explosiveness. It does still look like the Rams offense, but like, what is it about the nature of this offense that has led to this kind of, I guess, efficiency? Like, again, I don't want to keep using, these NFL tropes, but that's very much what it feels like.
Is it fair just to say Amon-Ra St. Brown? Because I think he has like a huge part in it. I think in the past 4 weeks, he's second amongst NFL receivers in yardage, just total. Like, I think it's in him and Devontae Adams are 1 and 2. And so, yeah, I mean, they look for so many different ways to use that guy, whether it says eye candy to get someone else open, use him in the backfield, use him on third down. I think he leads the NFL in conversions on third down per third down route run. So he's just become the centerpiece of the offense. And it's why the kind of buzzworthy topic in Detroit this week is Amon-Ra St. Brown a top 10 wide receiver? And if that's exactly what Ben Johnson said. He's playing like a top 5, top 10 receiver right now. And I don't know if I can argue against that right now.
Well, let's get into that in a second. Jared Goff, what is he?
Not a top 10 quarterback, I would say.
Interesting.
But now, I mean, it's interesting because that's another hot topic right now is whether he can actually be this quarterback of the future here, at least for the remainder of his contract, which I think is either 2 or 3 more years. Especially considering the Lions might have a top 5 draft pick because of the Rams.
I was about to say, bro, you've got a top 5 draft pick.
Yeah, the right guy's got to be there, though.
Not a ton of opportunity. Well, I mean, there's a pretty good chance. Not a ton of opportunities to grab a quarterback that high.
Well, you're right, and that's why it's an interesting conundrum to have, because you do have a guy who's shown he's capable with the right supporting cast that he can at the very least make a Super Bowl. And so do you risk, maybe a top 15 guy getting rid of a top 15 quarterback for a chance at a top 5 quarterback in the drafts? It's an interesting conundrum, and the things that Jared Goff has been doing well as of late is taking care of the football, which is something that he's not particularly great at. And if we're stretching this out to an entire season, I don't know how sustainable that's going to be. But they have a strong offensive line, which is what he needs because he doesn't play well off platform. He has weapons that can get open, and he has at least a moderately good run game. And so that allows him to do what he does best, which is play action. So the Lions have really set up everything for him to succeed, like I said last time, and he's succeeding. And the only time he didn't is when, again, they were down a lot of wide receivers. They were down some running backs. They were down some interior offensive linemen. And so I don't know. Sometimes I go and I think to myself, well, everything has to be perfect for this guy. You have to literally build every little piece perfectly for him in order to for him to succeed. And then I also think, well, the times that he's been really bad, it's not just been that he's missing a piece there. He's missing a piece there. It's missing basically everything that's tantamount to this offense. So I don't know. I'm in a weird spot with him where, even there was a podcast on the Ringer today that said, the Lions should go forward with Jared Goff. And I'm like,
whoa, man, this is you're getting the Kirk Cousins experience right now.
Maybe is that what that is?
It's rough, man.
Oh, jeez. I mean, it could be worse. It could be worse.
It has been historically.
Yes. Oftentimes.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get to those receivers because obviously they are currently driving this offense in a big way. So I do want to talk about Jameson Williams real quick, but Amon-Ra St. Brown. Mm-hmm. Rank the NFL receivers and then stop when you get to Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Oh, geez. You're going to make me pull up a list here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I am.
All right. Well,
I'm pulling up a list too.
Okay. I mean, you got to start with Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs, and Tyreek Hill. I think those are probably the safest top 3, right?
The 538 receiver rankings do have A.J. Brown up there because of his remarkable ability to do all the A.J. Brown stuff. But yeah, that's your top 4. Easy.
Devontae Adams deserves to be up there. Probably Cooper Kupp.
So we're including receivers that are currently not. Okay. I think that's fine.
I'll take Cooper Kupp out there and bump Amon-Ra. Do you want me to do that? But on like, I think not. Like, we're already into conversation where I think Amon-Ra St. Brown could be there.
You're kidding. Come on, man. You haven't mentioned Jamar Chase.
Okay,
Right?
Jamar Chase. Sorry, I'm looking at current catch leaders, and I don't know why he's not on the top 20. Am I missing something? He was injured a bunch, probably.
Yeah, maybe. So you haven't mentioned Jamar Chase. Would you take DeAndre Hopkins or Amon-Ra St. Brown?
For the here and now or long term?
Like today.
Okay, I'd take Hopkins.
Okay. So we've got AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins. So I'm at 6, right?
Yep.
Devontae Adams, so that's 7. This is not me putting it in order, right? But that's
right,
that's 7. Either. So okay. I think now we get into the territory where if you're really optimistic about Amon-Ra St. Brown, then you can begin to have conversations. I think some of these receivers are better, right? But then you can have these conversations, right? Because Mike Evans isn't who he was. Godwin isn't who he was.
Right.
Would you rather have Devonta Smith or Amon-Ra St. Brown?
That's a tough one. I think, I don't know. You're probably going to hold my feet to the fire here, but I think like he deserves to be in this tier. You know, Jalen Waddle, Terry McLaurin, maybe even
the
Chris
question
Olave,
isn't what tier
Tyler
of receiver
Lockett.
he's in. The question is, where does he rank?
I don't know. Man, I haven't watched a ton of Devontae Smith, if I'm being completely honest.
Okay, so Devontae Smith, I'm just going to put him up there because you've ceded that ground. Tyler Lockett.
Oh, I love Tyler Lockett.
You should. He rules.
He's 30, though.
Yeah. And he's going to start tomorrow. Like, what's the...
All right, Tyler Lockett's the last one. Whoever you say after this, I'm saying no.
Oh, DK Metcalf? Really?
Nope. Yep, sorry.
Because you hit 10. That's what you knew where we were. You had the count. You had the count. All right. Before we get into whether or not Calvin Ridley is a better receiver than Amon-Ra St. Brown, should he ever see the field again for his treasonous crimes? What makes St. Brown so good?
I mean, I'm going to try really hard to avoid the tropes here of grit and hardworking and all of that stuff. But
right.
No, I think he's really developed as a pass route runner. He's got incredible hands. One of the most incredible moments from the Jaguars game, he took a shot over the middle on a Jared Goff murder ball, was down for like 30 seconds, popped up, ran to the sideline, and was in the next play. And I think he converted a third down right after that. And he also does all the dirty work when it comes to blocking. Like, I know NFL comps are horrible and stupid and a waste of time, but this guy's looked like Hines Ward from the minute he stepped on a football.
I think you mentioned that when I was on your show or something like that. Yeah.
And he lives up to it. And I mean, he's the identity of that offense, not just in terms of him being the centerpiece, but in terms of, just identity. Like they really follow his lead, and I don't know. I'm starting to fall into that territory.
Yeah,
where
this is all this. And he's a good receiver, man. This isn't helping me at all.
And the versatility is there too, right? And it's not that he's going to be a deep receiver, he's going to be an outside guy, but they use him in motion almost on every single play. And whether that's to use his eye candy or to give him an end around every now and then, it garners attention. And even though he's garnered all this attention, like I said, last 4 weeks, number 2 in receiving yards, last 6 weeks, I think he's down to 4. So whatever they and like I said, Ben Johnson really has been center piecing him as the offense. So just using, I think Ben Johnson definitely does deserve an assist kind of for all the production he's been getting, because Amon-Ra is really the guy who gets most of the attention from the defense, because the Lions don't have all-stars outside of him yet.
T. Higgins.
No.
What?
No.
No, okay, no. This is just because you drew the line in the sand. This is not even an honest evaluation anymore. Terry McLaurin.
I thought I mentioned Terry. Did we not put Terry up there?
When I was recounting it
Oh.
again, I did not bring up Terry McLaurin. But if you did, I'm going to put that down. That means Amon-Ra St. Brown is at best 11th. Wow. Incredible. I didn't even bring up Chris Olave.
Nah, too young.
Too young.
His career is too young. Not
Debo.
We're not sure yet.
Debo Samuel.
Never heard of him.
All right, let's talk about the guy that you were kind of implying would be the star next to him, Jameson Williams.
Yeah, I gave you the perfect segue, and you had to hold my feet to the fire instead.
Yeah, I'm not a good person. Or a good friend. Jameson Williams, I think he had like 8 snaps last week, 2 routes run, something like that.
Yep.
1 target.
Two of them were victory formation.
Yeah. So
very nice of the coaching staff to do.
Yeah, it's valuable experience for him to have. 2 routes run, 1 target, 0 catches. Is he going to be full go? Is he going to be like 10, 15 snaps, 30, 40 snaps? What do you anticipate here?
Probably closer to that first estimate, 10, 15. They've really been conservative with bringing in guys that are coming off long-term injuries this year, and they're obviously going to be super careful with him. Apparently not careful enough where they won't consider playing him at gunner, which he was going to do against Jacksonville, but then the Lions didn't punt, so that play went in the trash. But yeah, no, I think they're going to take him along slowly. I think there's no real rush to do so since their offense is playing well. But at the same time, like, he's wowing them in practice, and so they're having a hard time keeping him off the field in general. But yeah, no, I think 15 to 20 is probably what I would guess in this game. It's obviously a big game. It's an important game. So they want whatever he can bring the team, but I think they still want him. I mean, like, this guy's had 2 weeks of practice, and really this is it's technically his third, but the first week was walk through Thanksgiving. And so, literally today was his 5th full on practice. So I don't think they're ready to throw a full load at him, but they're going to give him some looks. So they'll probably throw him the ball on something other than a 9 route this game. So yeah, it'll be interesting. It should be exciting. And I don't know if it'll be the same as last week where the crowd went crazy every time he just stepped on the field. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was.
What do you anticipate his role in the offense to be?
Well, I mean, in general, I think it's to stretch the field, and I know that's a boring, easy answer, but it is what it is. When you have a guy like Amon-Ra who can cover the middle of the field, you want to draw as much attention away from him as you can. And so I think that's, and not that they're just going to they trade it up to get a decoy, but we were just talking about this team has been lacking in explosive plays. He's a guy that can give it to you. So not just with the deep ball, catch and run. So yeah, I mean, it's easy to make a Tyreek Hill type of comparison, but that is kind of what they're hoping, I'm sure.
Keenan Allen, but healthy. Would you take him over Amon-Ra?
I mean, that's a made up person. You can't Calvin Johnson, but unretired. You can't do that.
Let's talk a little bit about DJ Chark. He was able to play a revenge game, 98 yards, something like that.
Yeah.
A lot of it on that 41-yarder that was extremely well placed, but I thought, really well caught. He was able to hold on through some pretty big contact. What does he provide in a way that complements what Amon-Ra St. Brown can do?
Again, I think it's stretching the field to the boundaries a little bit. The Lions really don't do that particularly well unless they're throwing really, really short. And allows kind of a jump ball option that the Lions haven't utilized. I feel like the only deep shots they really took before DJ Chark came back were to a guy like Khalif Raymond. I mean, so much of this wide receiving core is under 6 foot. And so getting Josh Reynolds back, a guy who is taller, and DJ Chark have allowed them to do that. But Chark is the more physical of the two, and that's something that the Lions just haven't traditionally had since Jared Goff has been in town, because I think they prefer kind of the more speedy option. Not that DJ Chark is not speedy. When his ankle is feeling 100%, he can be a 4-3, 4-4 guy. So Yeah, I think it's just that combination of size and speed that no one else short of Jameson Williams really has. And again, if these deep shots can continue, you take some guys out of the box and maybe you get your run game going a little bit better than it's been playing in general. But, we haven't really seen all of that work together really since early in the season when everyone was healthy. Even last week, they just aired the ball out a ton. They were up 2 or 3 scores that entire game, and the game plan was still have Jared Goff throw the ball 41 times. I think maybe down the line, if that pipeline to Chark continues to show dividends, then maybe people start backing out of the box, because Lions have been seeing a lot of 8-man boxes really since the beginning of the season, and it's effectively stopped them in a lot of ways. So Chark is bringing a little bit of an extra dimension to help ease up that box, and hopefully we see that actually happen once they face a team that maybe is a little bit better against the pass.
All right, so the Lions also have the most important Brock in the NFL, Brock Wright. So my understanding is that he is taking most of the tight end snaps after DJ Hawkinson's gone, right? What's going on with him? James Mitchell, former Minnesota guy Shane Zylstra. What's going on?
Yeah, they really utilize all 3 of those guys at a pretty good clip for all 3. And I wouldn't say any one of them is particularly great at anything right now. They're average blockers. They're good as kind of those guys that just slip out and go unnoticed in coverage sometimes, especially in the red zone. The Lions like to do that a lot, and I think that's a large part, and because they're such a red zone threat on the ground, where it's not necessarily that any of these tight ends are good at it. It's just that you could run that with an offensive tackle and it would work with how much of a threat Jamal Williams is right now in the red zone. Mm-hmm. And so not really flashy play. James Mitchell's coming along slowly, their 5th round pick or whatever it was, coming back from a torn ACL. So, he's another one of those guys they took back. They took along very slowly. So there's nothing really special or interesting about the tight end group, if I'm being completely honest. I think they just figured out they had other weapons that they liked better at wide receiver, at running back. So, all right, yeah, have TJ.
Do you? Enjoy. So you don't regret losing TJ?
I don't think so. I don't think the plan was to ever pay him going forward. And he's due $9 million on his 5th year next year, and then probably would have been upwards of 15 maybe after that. And so I think the Lions were just kind of looking down the line on that one, being like, probably not going to pay this guy. We were 1-5 or 1-6 at the time. Let's cut our losses there and build on the perimeter a little bit more instead.
Massive cope. Let's talk about the offensive line. We've got I would say Frank Ragnow is, I don't know, maybe the 2nd best center in the NFC. But he's up there in the top 5 in the NFL for sure, right?
Yeah.
It's like him, Creed Humphrey, Kelsey, who's about to retire anyway. Then you've got him, you've got Taylor Decker, Jonah Jackson's back. I don't think he was in the game against the Vikings early on, if I remember. I'm trying to remember.
Maybe. I don't remember either.
Penei Sewell at right tackle, somebody at guard. What's going on there? But yeah, it seems like this offensive line is a good deal healthier than when the Vikings originally played them. That might be playing a role here. Tell me kind of what your thoughts on the offensive line are, concerns you have. Is Jonah Jackson living up to what people expected of him now that he's come back from injury, etc.?
Yeah, I think the Lions are in a really good spot in 4 out of 5 positions, and then that 5th position, they're in a really, really bad spot. I do think Jonah Jackson is back to playing it. I don't think necessarily he was a Pro Bowler last year, even though he was technically a Pro Bowler. I think now, especially after he's returned from this injury, I think he's been better than ever. Taylor Decker is still a really good pass blocker, a so-so run blocker, and then Penei, I think, has taken a step from his rookie year and is becoming an elite right tackle in this league. So you mentioned Frank Ragnow. Right guard, though, has been a revolving door, mostly because of injuries, partially because of horrible play. They lost Vaitai to start the year. He didn't even play a single game this year. Then I don't even remember what the progression of players were, but they went to Logan Stenberg, a former 4th or 5th round pick from Kentucky, who's a run mauler, but just maybe the biggest liability I've ever seen as a pass protector. They go last week. It was Coyote Awosika, which is a fun name to say. Not a great name. Not great fun to watch, if I'm being completely honest.
Mm.
I think that was either his first career start or the week before was. Didn't go particularly well. Evan Brown is probably the guy you're going to see this week, which is best case scenario for the Lions. Former
hurt. Is that why Owasika was playing?
Yeah, Evan Brown was hurt with an ankle injury or foot injury or somewhere down there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he was the backup center last year, filled in for Frank Ragnow when he was dealing with a toe injury.
Yeah,
and
I remember talking about him last year.
Yeah,
that's right.
Played particularly well, and he's been okay at guard, which is an upgrade because it's been, like I said, a revolving door, really, really bad, especially in pass protection. I can't prove this because I don't have the metrics that they use, but when you look at like pass block win rate and PFF score of the entire Lions offensive line, it's not impressive, but I'm willing to bet that just right guard alone is dragging down that entire unit pretty far.
Mm-hmm. That's fair.
That's massive cope right there.
That is cope as well. Yeah, for sure. Okay, yeah, let's talk about the defense. So at the beginning of the year, oh, hey, what's going on, man?
That's my dog. He's feeling good.
Yeah, I mean, dog heard about some dogs. That makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, so the defense. At the beginning of the year, the Lions were an extremely blitz-heavy team, played a lot of man coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Feels like, especially in these last 5 weeks, that's not the case, but Kirk Cousins is this year, it's not actually historically been the case, but this year has been the worst quarterback in the NFL against the blitz, depending on where you set your passing minimums. The only person worse than him, Carson Wentz, was benched a while ago. So do you think that this is a scenario where the Lions are just going to say, hey, screw it. Let's just get after the quarterback? Because, I mean, the Vikings just have not been able to compete against the blitz.
It's a good question. I think on obvious passing downs, yes. I think they still are a pretty aggressive team, especially if, third and longs, things like that. Like most teams are, they get a little bit more aggressive. I think they have a lot more confidence in their secondary. There's a little bit more stability there now. You're going to see a few different guys that you didn't see in that first matchup. Obviously, Tracy Walker went down in that matchup, so now they have Kirby Joseph, a rookie who's been playing for 6, 7, 8 weeks now. They feel a little bit more confident in his ability there. Amani Oruwariye, I think, started the Vikings game, and he's been thoroughly benched at this point. And they like a Jerry Jacobs, a second-year guy who plays very physical and gritty, to throw in another Dan Campbellism. So I think first of all they're going to be relieved that they're not playing a mobile quarterback, which I think maybe played a part in why the Lions hadn't been so aggressive in the past month or so. They've been playing a lot of guys that can beat them with their feet and have beat them with their feet. I think they probably will turn up maybe more of the aggression than you've seen in the past month or two when the Lions defense has actually improved quite a bit.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about some of the individual players. I think when you talk about has improved quite a bit, I think two players on the defensive line come to mind. The first, of course, is Aiden Hutchinson, the first-round pick who, the preseason looked kind of good, but the camp reports were that he was kind of up and down. I don't think he had a great start to the season, but has been playing pretty well, not just in the Packers game, but kind of generally over the past couple of weeks. And then also James Houston, sixth-round pick, another rookie.
Right.
Who's just been good, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking pretty low snap count for a guy like this. Who's essentially just going to be your NASCAR package guy who's again, third and long, obvious passing situations, maybe 2-minute drill type of situations. You'll see him, but I mean, he's a lot of fun to watch. He's crazy athletic. He just destroyed people at Jackson State last year, and off to a pretty darn good start. He has something like 20 snaps and 3 sacks, something crazy like that. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see how that pans out. We'll see once, offensive linemen start reacting to, his one move that we've basically seen, which is just run really fast and dip. But
good move.
If it works, it works, right? And so, yeah, I'm not ready to say like this Lions pass rush is elite or even close to that. I think Aiden Hutchinson still is kind of, I don't think he'll ever be what even James Houston potentially could be in terms of a pass rusher, but he's a more well-rounded guy, and a guy that I think Hutchinson's best trait so far hasn't been his ability to pass rush or anything like that. It's really been his ability to diagnose. It led to a couple of his interceptions that he has. It led to an interception for from Jeff Okudah on a play that Justin Fields threw an interception because basically Aiden Hutchinson took away the screen completely. So, yeah, I know you didn't really specifically ask just about the pass rush in general, but I think the Lions are getting improved play from their edges in general, just due to a variety of reasons. But mostly, yeah, I think those two guys have played a big part in it.
Well, so no, I mean, let's get into that question. So I think is Romeo Okwara going to be back?
Yeah, this should be his first game back from the Achilles injury that he suffered, I believe, against the Vikings last year, early in the season.
Revenge-ish.
Revenge-ish. But again, because the Lions like to take these guys along slowly, I would not expect it to be more than 10 snaps.
Okay. So I mean, like, speaking of injury, it's him, the other Okwara, Julian, Charles Harris, Levi and Wuzurike. I mean, the defensive line is like, I mean, all of these guys could play pretty significant roles and they're just gone, right? Like that's pretty big. That said, I mean, it's still very talented. I'm not super impressed with the second round pick, Josh Pascal. Like, I don't pronounce the H. Is that what's happening here? Okay.
Yeah, something like that.
How's he been playing? And then, in order to wash that out of your mouth, how's Aleem McNeil been playing?
Yeah, Pascal has had a up and down season. He started off actually really hot, especially as a run defender. He's I think that's what they liked about him. He'd kind of be that closed end guy where, he'll set the edge on the outside and then maybe slip in sometimes on some pass rushing downs. We haven't really seen the pass rushing stuff much yet. And he also had an injury and is now coming back from it and slowly increasing his role. So I think that slowed down his rookie season some. But yeah, I'd rather talk about Aleem McNeil because he had one really good breakout game. I want to say 2 or 3 weeks ago. I can't remember exactly who it was against. Maybe the Giants, but their interior offensive line was not particularly good. But yeah, good against the run, flashes some of those pass rushing potentials. The interesting thing about him is that, when he was drafted and even last year, they mostly used him as a nose. Now they use Bugs as their nose and Aleem more as a 3-tech, which seems to fit him a little bit better. Obviously, he's not quite as athletic as some of the leaner 3-techs in this league, but he's a guy that really, I think, fits what they want to do and has shown a little bit of flashes to reaching his full potential, but he's still not quite there yet.
All right. I think, is there anything else along the defensive line that we definitely need to cover?
I mean, if you want to know a little bit about Kaminsky, he's been playing okay. John Kaminsky, he plays
his testing numbers were through the roof. Was he 6th round pick for Atlanta? I was kind of curious about the Vikings getting him, but talking about him.
He's made a couple plays. Maybe the most interesting thing about him is that he has a ginormous cast on his hand right now from a kind of brutal injury he had, I don't know, week 2 or week 3. No, I don't know. He's, again, God, I keep slipping into these Dan Campbellisms. I've been to far too many of his press conferences. But he's a strong guy. I think he's gotten his hand on maybe a half dozen passes in terms of, just being a guy that can jump up and bat down passes. But again, not much of a pass rusher, just kind of a guy that clogs up space.
All right. Just kind of clogs up space. Love it. Linebackers, an area that the Lions no longer seem interested in investing in.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know, for the better. There's not been a position with a ton of hits. But the investments, the really cheap investments made into players like Derek Barnes, Chris Board, Alex Anzalone, and especially it seems like Malcolm Rodriguez are paying off, but both stars seem still fairly limited. Can you tell me about this linebacker group?
Yeah, so Alex Anzalone is kind of like the heart and soul of the group and maybe the heart and soul of the defense, but that almost feels like more of an emotional leadership than actual play on the field. Not that he's been absolutely horrible, but he's a guy that's relatively athletic and can play sideline to sideline, but instincts sometimes are an issue. Tackling is sometimes an issue. Not fantastic in coverage. I think Malcolm Rodriguez is all of the things that he's not, which is he is more instinctive. Maybe he doesn't have the coverage necessarily yet either, but he's getting there too. Definitely a solid tackler tackler, as a former wrestler. So I think Malcolm is kind of the protege to what they have in Alex Anzalone, and hopefully a much better one. And then Derek Barnes has kind of been coming on as of late. He has missed the first 2 weeks of 2 practices of the week, so I'm not entirely sure if he gives it a go. And then Chris Board is just kind of their third down coverage guy. He might have an expanded role if Derek Barnes doesn't play, but in general, I think you'll mostly see Chris Board just on occasional third downs, not even every passing third down. And then he's really a key special teams guy as well.
All right. That allows us to talk a little bit about the defensive backs, which I feel like when it comes to the Lions, not many people do talk about. I mean, Kirby Joseph has had some pretty great moments in the past couple of weeks. A rookie 3rd-round pick. Deshaun Elliott, it just seems like is just playing well, it feels like.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. And Jeff Okudah is Jeff Okudah. I mean, that's a solid group to work with. Obviously, there's more beyond that. We can talk about that entire group. And that's all with Tracy Walker injured. What are your feelings on the secondary? Because it feels like they wanted to lean on them a lot, and then they couldn't.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's really and I think that's something that they really took a close look at the bye week as what can we do to fix this? And out of the first couple games out of the bye week, it didn't work, which is why former defensive backs coach Aubrey Pleasant was fired at that time, because it just whatever they were trying to do in the secondary wasn't working, wasn't getting to the players. That Dolphins game, which is the game that really kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. They were supposed to play press coverage a lot in that game, and they just didn't. And so
when you say supposed to, it didn't. They just did not listen to the coaching, or what?
It's hard to explain because I don't exactly know where the communication breakdown was, because all week they said we need to be physical with this. These set of receivers. If you get Tyreek Hill going, you're not going to stop him. You don't want him running full speed into the second level of your defense. And then they just didn't do it. And so, we heard that from, Dan Campbell and defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn, and then it didn't happen. So, okay, well, if this was our game plan and it didn't get properly communicated to the players, and apparently no one did anything about it in the game, I guess that means you fire your defensive backs coach. And guess what? Since then, they've been a lot better. And you never want to point to one guy's firing as, the thing that turns around everything. And again, we're dealing with small sample sizes here. So it's too early to say that just fixed everything. And it's definitely not completely true. Like you said, Kirby Joseph has kind of been coming into his own, and, with him, 6 or 7 starts deep now, okay, yeah, it makes sense that he's playing better now. And like I said, they benched Amani Oruwariye, their former 4th-round pick, in favor of Jerry Jacobs. He's been a better fit of what they're trying to do. And yeah, Jeff Okudah's coming on nicely, and everything's just kind of starting to click. And it just feels like this was more inevitable in terms of okay, now these guys are just kind of getting what they're trying to do. The thing that they keep saying to the media is listen, we have maybe 2 guys in the starting lineup that were in the starting lineup last year when, there wasn't a coaching change, there wasn't a scheme change or anything like that. It was injuries that happened last year. It was injuries that happened this year, a whole bunch of new guys. And yeah, by the time October, November hits, that's when you'll see some of these things clicking with new offenses, with new players, with new defenses. So I think part of it is just everything is starting to click now. And Deshaun Elliott, I think, has really stepped up. I'm glad you mentioned him in the absence of Tracy Walker, because he was kind of the leader of that secondary in terms of communication, in terms of diagnosis, and all those sort of things. And I think Deshaun Elliott has kind of been the key piece to step up in that role since.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about the best player on the Lions roster. Jack Fox didn't even get to see the field outside of some holds on extra points and field goals. That just feels rude, doesn't it?
I mean, they give him kickoff duties too, I believe. So I don't pay that much attention to this. I know you like talking about punters.
I love Jack Fox. I love Jack Fox.
I just feel like the last time I was on here, you were trying to trash Jack Fox because he wasn't as good as I don't even know your punter's name.
Ryan Wright?
Sure, that guy.
Oh my god. Well, if they got into a fight, Ryan Wright would win. That's the important part. Yeah, my punter could beat up your punter. He's 6'5", 220. Jack Fox doesn't stand a chance.
No problem.
But it is kind of like, so not to talk about the punter, but rather to talk about punting. It is interesting, of course, that they did not punt in the last game.
Yeah.
So the Lions are like famously aggressive now on fourth down.
Yep.
Is this like, apathy is the wrong word, but is this like resistance to punting something that feels driven by kind of the attitude Dan Campbell wants to take about being aggressive just generally? Is it driven by, do you think, a respect for the data, which seems kind of unlikely to me? Is it that, hey, we're just not in punting range all that often, which is a great thing? What is it?
I think I think part of it is they're playing to the team's strength, which has been the offense for a very long time. And so when you're in a 4th and 1 situation, would you rather put the ball in your defense's hand or your offense's hand in a high percentage play? I think Dan Campbell was like, okay, yeah, let's continue being aggressive and putting it in our offense's hand. I do think they have found themselves in an extraordinarily high amount of 4th and shorts as well, which they were kind of bad at earlier in the season, but they've gotten better at.
They went for it a lot and it wasn't working. And I was like, no, he's going to get tricked. No.
But no, he's, to his credit, he hasn't done a Brandon Staley and he's stuck with it, which I give him credit to. I'm probably with you that I don't think it's that analytically based. And a lot of times Dan Campbell will tell you himself he's just going with his gut, which I hate when he says that.
Well, it's one of those things where it's like, well, I'm glad, but like, what if your gut just decides something else, and now we're done for?
Or yeah, what if your gut decides you want to kick a 54-yard field goal against the Vikings when a punt or a go for it would have been a better option? Yeah. So I think a lot of it is just he's aggressive in nature. I think a lot of it comes from Sean Payton, which he brings up often as an influence on him. And so, I always wondered if it was out of a little bit of necessity because the team wasn't very good, obviously. And so, you look back to that Rams game last year where they pulled off 2 fake punts and an onside kick. And you're like, okay, is that just Dan Campbell being aggressive, or is that Dan Campbell being like, we suck, we need to pull out all the stops to win a football game? And I was wondering if that crossed over with the 4th down stuff. And now that they're a better team, well, they really haven't gone for it on 4th down a lot over this 5-game stretch. And I think part of that is just they haven't found themselves in a lot of those situations. But part of me also wonders, like, okay, now that they're kind of, again, I'm not ready to call this team a good team yet, but now that they're right up against that, maybe they do see a little bit of a drop off in that aggression.
So if you mentioned kind of briefly that, like, some of it is kind of driven by the fact, the offense is just strictly better than the defense. In a world where that's not the case, if they're kind of even in strength, or you kind of like the defensive matchups more, or hey, the defense is just better than the offense in a hypothetical world, do you think they go for it a lot less?
It's possible. I still think Dan Campbell in general will err on the side of aggression more so than not. But I feel like even early last year, we saw them kind of go a little conservative in moments in which I didn't expect them to be. And I think maybe at that point they still had faith that their defense wasn't really, really bad, which it was last year as well. So I think it's hard for me to guess on a hypothetical there, but I guess if I did have to guess, I still think Campbell would err on the side of aggression at this point.
Fair enough. Lions are favored by 2.5, depends on what line and when you check. But
yeah,
the Vikings before the Lions just waxed the Jaguars 40 to, was it 13?
14, yeah.
14, okay. So the Jaguars didn't get to 15, which would have been a much more interesting score.
Sure.
40 to 14. The Vikings in the advanced lines, which don't have a ton of money on them, so you can't really say that this was definitive. But, there was a little bit of money moving things one way or the other. The Vikings in the advanced line were favored by like 2 points. And then it dropped to 1. And then after the game was over, it was pick'em. Then it was 1 point in the Lions, and now it's 2.5. Gamblers are not, especially the ones that have the ability to move lines by making large bets at casinos, are not known for overreacting to short-term trends. It's kind of the thing that they don't do. What is driving it?
I mean, I'm no Vegas expert, so I don't know if I can legitimately
I
answer
need
that
you
question,
to be one right now.
Maybe it's your influence on
Oh,
people's
no.
view of the Vikings.
I've done it. No.
I don't know, man. I mean, I think maybe you look back to that week 3 matchup and you look at a Lions team that really took this team to the edge and probably should have won that game on the road. And then you take a Lions team today that's playing a lot better than that team was back then, and a Vikings team that, I mean, it's probably not fair because I'm on the outside saying that, like, I don't see any huge changes on the way the Vikings have been playing from then to now, which again, probably just me being ignorant, but
No, they beat the Bills. Come on.
They did. They sure did. I mean, I don't know. Anytime I look at this Vikings team, all I think about is just how in the world are they 9-0 in 1-score games? That doesn't happen. And so, yeah, I'm not.
I invite you to join Vikings Twitter and have a spirited discussion.
No, you know what? I've seen your timeline enough. No thanks. But yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to make the Vikings are due argument here, but I think this is I think this is definitely a tight matchup, right? I mean, these two teams have played each other tight in each of the past 4. Like, someone told me, I think the last games, 3 or 4 matchups have a total, win differential of 11 points or something, which feels right. And so I don't know. I don't know why things have tipped to the Lions' point as much as they had, but like the Lions are playing as a really good team. I think, like, to go back to DVOA, I think they're in the past 5 or 6 weeks 6th overall DVOA, and listen, they've played some good teams in that stretch, and I'm sure Viking fans don't like DVOA because we all know how they're painting the Vikings as right now, and so just go on that alone. What the Lions I think are 16th or 13th or something, and the Vikings are 20th. So there you go.
All right,
2.5 points.
Dang. That's a vicious hate from Viking hater Jeremy Reisman.
Do you know that I'm actually considered a Vikings lover on our side of the podcast?
Yeah, some people made some references to it when I was on your podcast, so I figured it out. Remember, so you can, if you don't like his takes, you can tweet him at Detroit on Lion. That's on Lion, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
another stupidly clever thing that only makes it more difficult to find me.
Absolutely killing it. All right, so the Lions are in the unusual position where they're favored against a winning team. I feel like that hasn't happened in a long time.
This is the first time, I'm 99% sure here, the Lions have been favored against a 10-win team since 2011.
Oh, wow.
And that was against the Packers in Week 17, who were resting whoever their quarterback was, and Matt Flynn destroyed the Lions.
Whoever the quarterback was Aaron Rodgers' best season.
Okay.
Yeah,
I've heard of that guy.
Yeah.
I didn't know how close that was to the.
No, I understand because he took over 2008, right? Because Favre was the Jets 2008, Vikings 2009. So
the Lions went 0-16 in that era. So I just kind of tried to forget as much as possible.
Okay, cool. So what's your game prediction?
I'm just going to throw something random out here because I haven't thought about it enough. So, 31-28 Lions.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Fine.
No explanation.
Yeah. That hits the over actually. So, I'll go with the over is like 52. I'll go Vikings 28, Lions 25. Weird scores.
I like the ones that end in 5s.
Yeah. Cool. So I already said that people can find you at Detroit Online. Where else can they find you or your work?
Yeah, prideofdetroit.com is where all my written work goes. Twitch.tv/prideofdetroit if you want to join our live streams pre and post game. And yeah, search the PODcast and just tell me what you get. Send me on Twitter what you find just searching PODcast.
All right, man. Thanks for coming on. It's always a pleasure.
Appreciate it.
All right, let's go to the mailbag. And the first question is from Tommy Gunn, who asks, with Jalen Reagor absolutely assuring a Vikings victory, In what heartbreaking manner will this not happen, specifically punishing him for taunting the lack of regression?
um, I feel like it would have to be him like muffing a punt, right? Because he's muffed some punts and it has not hurt the Vikings at all. Like the Vikings have recovered it. So I feel like the way that it happens is he specifically muffs a punt, right? And then that occurs near the end zone. The Lions score, and it is a 1-score game that the Vikings lose.
It seems the most logical possibility. Yeah. Let's go to the next question, which is from Corey, who asks, Brett Coleman said the use of QQH, which, forgive me if I'm incorrect here, but quarter, half?
Yes.
Okay. Said the usage of QQH for the Vikings defense has baited QBs and led to more interceptions at the cost of more yardage given up. Is this type of coverage by design or by need given the talent, and will it hold against QBs like Goff, or is it always a gamble regardless of the quarterback? Also, as a longtime Patreon supporter, when can I expect my homemade candy corn? There's a deep dive.
Oh, wow. That was years ago. So people unfamiliar, I have long defended homemade candy corn, which is a different product than like Brock's or whatever, the BRACH, right? Brock's candy corn, which is like made of like essentially a food grade wax. It's not quite that, but it is a different product than the mallow cream used to make candy corn. And so I was getting so heated at all the people that disagreed with me. I said, okay, I've made homemade candy corn before. I'll make it again. I'll send it to anybody who's a patron. I had some trouble producing the amount of candy corn I needed in order to get that out. So over the course of actual years, I made the candy corn and sent it out to the patrons and said, hey, if any of you still don't have it, let me know. Otherwise, you're just not going to get it. So actually, sorry, Corey, you missed your chance in 2017.
It was before that. Like this was pre-Patreon. This was just if you listen to the show and want candy corn, Arif will mail it to you.
Yeah. Wow. Incredible. This is a long time ago. So
it's like
that's not happening.
2014, maybe.
Yeah, it must have been, right?
Yeah.
Because I was like using Alton Brown's Recipe. I was still like watching like Good Eats, not as it was still on, but like the replays.
Mm-hmm.
So quarter, half is what it sounds like. The covered shell is that you're playing cover 4 on one side and cover 2 on the other side. And so cover 4 is when you have 4 deep defenders all covering equivalent size zones, typically sideline to between the numbers and the hashes, between the numbers and the hashes to the center of the center of the field to between the numbers and the hashes, between the numbers and the hashes to the other sideline. So 4 equidistant zones in order to have 4 deep defenders and prevent deep plays. Cover 4 often turns into a kind of man coverage, especially in the modern NFL. Cover 2 is what the Vikings used to run before Zimmer as a base defense. And so there would be 2 safeties deep. Sometimes you'd have cover 2 invert where a cornerback and a safety swap after the snap, but it would be 2 safeties deep and they cover much larger zones. But the benefit, of course, is that you've got more underneath coverage because your cornerbacks are in a zone that is basically right above the flats or the area right next to the line of scrimmage. So the Vikings use some defenses, some coordinators call it cover 6, some call it cover 7, mostly people from the Saban school of defense in Alabama. But cover 6, it's cover 4 plus cover 2. So one side, you've got 2 deep defenders that are covering each a quarter of the field. And the other side, you've got 1 deep defender covering half the field, quarter, half. The Vikings do it a little bit differently than other teams that do a bunch of cover 6. They align the half side to the strength of the offense, which means they align it to the side that essentially has more receivers. That is kind of unusual, but whatever. Either way, it is become an increasingly common defense because you can show cover 2 at the beginning of the play or rotate into cover 2 or whatever, and it messes with quarterback reads because if they're expecting a cover 2, you can run some routes that can put the safety in conflict, the deep half safety. Essentially, you run 2 deep routes into that safety's coverage assignment, And unless you've got some sort of man coverage cornerback with them, they're in conflict and they have to midpoint them and they can't cover really either of them, right? But if you do that against cover 4, both of those guys are covered because they are covering smaller portions of the field, so they can each pick up a guy, right? So you can't flood the zone. And your reads can be a little bit off if you're not just attempting to read whether or not there is one guy in the middle of the field or no guys in the middle of the field, right? Cover 1, cover 3, you've got a guy in the middle of the field. That's called middle of the field closed. And that will dictate kind of, your crossing routes. Crossing routes against cover 4 are typically a bad idea because the inside deep defender, his responsibility is often to what they call nail the crosser, but just pick up that crosser. And the other defender turns into a deep half coverage defender. But against cover 2, it's fine because you're crossing the safety's face, and it's difficult to make that turn. So those kinds of things can happen, and it can bait quarterbacks, but it does lead to more defenders deep rather than shallow, which means you give up a bunch of yards along the way until you get to the red zone, in which case cover 6 ends up becoming really good in the red zone. I would say that the interceptions that are coming about as a result of the cover 6 look, and a good example is the Patrick Peterson interception against the Bills, they are more... It is. I've done a lot of research into this, and though it is often described by coaches and defensive backs that zone defenses in general do a better job producing turnovers because you've got your eyes on the quarterback, the research tells us that that's not the case. That man coverage defenses will produce turnovers at a similar rate to zone coverage defenses. 1, and then 2, modern zone coverage defenses do not always have the defenders with their eyes to the quarterback. They instead have an understanding of what routes are being run and will modify their man coverage technique to the routes that are being run. And so they run basically a pickup man, essentially, where they pick up their assignment partway through the play. And so it's not quite the same. There's a lot of complications in looking at the data, especially at that broad of a level. Maybe defenses are running man coverage more often because they've got more talented players, and so on, right? So it's not like 100% foolproof. But I will say that certainly, especially Patrick Peterson, certainly a lot of his interceptions seem to be coming from this look. And so that makes a lot of sense to me. But I would argue that is kind of a nice happenstance, that those yards are going to hurt you more in the long run anyway. And I believe that this is a product of the talent the Vikings have available to them, especially at the cornerback position opposite Patrick Peterson. At first, they couldn't trust Cameron Dancer to pick up more complicated defenses. We saw how many miscommunications he had. After he got a little bit better, actually probably a lot better at avoiding those miscommunications, but still maintaining the high highs in terms of his level of play, he got injured, right? Now you've got rookies in there. And so you kind of have to revert back to a relatively simple defense so you don't overcomplicate things for them. When in Denver, when we saw that defense, or you take a look at the Fangio, Staley defenses generally, there's a lot more versatility. They're running a lot more coverages. The cover 6 stuff is still kind of a base defense that they'll often go to, but really the goal is to have 2 high safeties at the beginning of every snap, and then they rotate into whatever coverage that they actually end up going into. Most often, it's a version of 2 high, which is either cover 2 or cover 4 or cover 6. But very often it's not. One of the safeties spins down, one of the safeties goes up deep, and they're a cover 1, cover 3 safety, and you've got man coverage, or safeties blitz, you've got cover 0, whatever. It's meant to be a disguise that primarily goes into cover 2, cover 4 type looks. But here the Vikings are playing it at a much higher rate than they did at the Broncos, that the Chargers do now, that the Rams do now, and that the Bears did when it was a Fangio defense with the Bears. So I assume that it is a lot because of the personnel he has available to him. That said, I think that he's overcorrecting. The defense is still a huge concern of mine. And I think that the coordinator at Donatel is not kind of living up to what he needs to live up to.
By the way, Jeremy Reisman has tweeted out, when does my final episode on your podcast drop?
In a couple of years, Jeremy.
Yeah. Let's go to Chris, who asks, what actually is the point differential between the 2022 Vikings in the third quarter versus the 2021 Vikings in the last 2 minutes of each half?
I liked this question a lot when I saw this question. James like heard me. I was like excited to do this. First, because the research would be remarkably easy given the statistical tools I have available to me now. This would have been much harder 4 years ago. But second, because it is in theory, dramatically unfair question to ask, because it should make the third quarter Vikings look a lot worse than the last 2 minute Vikings, because that is a 15-minute affair, whereas we are talking about 4 minutes in the other calculation, right? And so I was like, oh, it's so interesting, because if that's close, that's very meaningful in some way. And if it's not close, maybe we can learn something from it either, right? And so I pulled it up, and the Vikings, by the way, are not the worst third quarter team in the NFL this year. That actually goes to the Detroit Lions, of all like the team they're about to play. It's perfect, right? So in points per game given up, or point margin per game, I should say, in the third quarter, number one is the Chiefs. They are plus 5.33. They're the only team with more than 4 points in point differential in the third quarter per game. And they're at 5.33. Really incredible stuff. Then you've got the Cowboys and the Bills and the Ravens and the Jaguars. So most of these teams are good. Some of them are not. At the very bottom, you've got the Giants at minus 4.83, or the Lions at minus 4.83, and the Vikings at minus 4.33. And then basically a whole point beyond those two is the Los Angeles Chargers at 3.5. So the Vikings are dramatically bad, but they're not the worst. Now, if you'll remember the discussions we were having about the final 2 minutes of games, or final 2 minutes of halves with the Vikings last year, I had said that as far back as the data goes, or as I could make the data go, because at some point I started doing it manually, but as far back as the data goes, the Vikings are the worst in NFL history in the final 2 minutes of halves. And, the research I just did just now validates that. The Vikings were the worst in the NFL in 2021 in the final 2 minutes of halves. And the Giants were ahead of them, the Texans were ahead of them, the Seahawks were ahead of them, and the Raiders were ahead of them, all in the bottom 5. Number one, by the way, for some reason was Dallas, which they were not the team they are today. So I find that kind of interesting. Minus 5.35 points per game. They gave up more points in the 4 minutes that occurred in the final moments of each half than in the 15 minutes that occur in the third quarter. Like, the Vikings were catastrophically bad in the third quarter now, but they were cataclysmically bad in the final 2 minutes of halves last year, which, if you looked at it this year, the Vikings are, I believe, number one in the NFL in the final 2 minutes. I have the ability to look right now, don't I? In 2022, let's take a look. Oh, they're not number one. They're number 9. That's in time to regulation. Let's also take a look at in the second quarter and do time until halftime. Yep, they're top 5 in the final 2 minutes of the half. So if you combine them, I believe that makes the Vikings second in the final 2 minutes of the half to the Buffalo Bills. So, or in the final 2 minutes of each quarter. So they are the opposite team right now, which is really cool. But in the third quarter, they are, I guess they're the Lions, right? they're pretty bad. But it is, the third quarter is going to be a mess. I think that's the one thing I know. It's going to be a mess.
Well, next question is going to be, let's see if I can get this right. Anya Taylor-Joy, who asks,
that's so good. It's spelled like adjusted net yards per attempt, Taylor-Joy.
What margin of victory over Detroit would you consider a comfortable win?
Comfortable? Like 10 points? It's tough to get 10-point wins in the NFL, but that's what comfortable is, right? Like the Cowboys are an extremely good team right now, and they are 18-point favorites. Like this weekend, like it's tough to get there, but that's the level of expectation that a team that has the second seed should have. That's like the only point I'm making. Like, all right, so Luke Braun and I got into a Twitter war like yesterday or 2 days ago. I don't remember anymore. Yesterday? It was probably yesterday. which comes across much harsher online on text, because Luke Braun and I were like DMing each other too, right? Like we don't actually hate each other, despite the fact that I have framed him for several crimes allegedly. I didn't do that, actually. Someone with a Luke Braun mask did.
True story.
Yeah, but you know, I took exception to the idea that looking at late game or looking at one score games as a method of analysis was lazy. And he said, you know, his argument is essentially like it doesn't hold up if you examine how each of those occur. And to him, if you take a look at something like win probability in the final minutes of the game, you have to pick an arbitrary point. I understand. And I know that Ty Shalter did something very similar a couple of years ago when he was looking at the Lions. That the Vikings were really only at threat of losing these games 5 out of those 9 times, right? And a lot of them were backdoor one-score games, right? And I remember this happening last year, right? When we talked about how the Vikings were tied the record for the most one-score games in history last year, right? Some of those games were backdoor. Like I remember the game against Chicago. Chicago scored like in the final seconds, and it turned it into a one-score game. Like there's an 8-point difference, right? And I think that is a fairly decent point to make. But the problem is that this does not go into, and I wish we had a little bit more time to talk about it on the football machine, but this does not go into the data in any meaningful sense. And by that, I mean, when you take those games out, right, for every team in the history of the data that we have, does that change our conclusions, right? Because right now, all of the data that talks about one-score games and teams with one-score wins includes the backdoor wins, right? It includes all of those teams that allowed backdoor points to turn a 2-score game into a 1-score game. Qualitatively, it definitely feels like that stuff shouldn't matter, but we have not tested it. And the data that we do have includes that data set, and it still very strongly implies that teams like the Vikings, which just like the Jets have, just like the Giants have, will fall off, right? Now, Luke also pointed out yesterday, I don't know how days work, that the Vikings are essentially regression-proof when it comes to their seed. That's true. If the Vikings are an average team for the rest of the season, they win 3, lose 2, or win 2, lose 3, they're almost certainly the second seed. They could lose 4, and there's a really good chance they beat the second seed. They're almost regression-proof. And so they're going to waltz into the playoffs, kind of. And hopefully they'll be using these games to learn how to win more effectively. At which point I hope they do stuff like beat teams like the Lions by 10. If you beat a good team by 10 points, that goes a long way to tell me that you are yourself a quality team, especially because against like really high quality opponents, right? Like the Buffalo Bills, the Dallas Cowboys, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Vikings are like 1-2, right? Like it's difficult in the point margin in their losses. Oof, right? So it tells me that like there is something here where the Vikings are an above average team. Now, if your goal is to have fun this season, watch some exciting games, you've already met it. None of this stuff matters, and that's cool. If your goal is to say the Vikings are a 10-2 team and should be treated as such when we talk about how likely they are to win games, then I have some issues. And if this was not supported by other elements of data like DVOA, like EPA, like pass differential, like all of this other data about that links to sustainability in the same way that one-score wins does, whether it is average performance from play to play, your ability to be efficient in passing versus your ability to stop efficient passing, your drive success rate, i.e. your ability to generate first downs and stop other teams from generating first downs, your DVOA, which is essentially your success rate combined with your explosive play rate and adjusted for opponent. If all of those would have suggested that the Vikings were a quality team, the one-score thing would mean a lot less to me. The one-score thing is a convenient shorthand, and you know, Luke's argument was that this is essentially a proxy, but there's a bunch of other data here that definitely recommends that you take the Vikings a little bit less seriously as a 10-2 team. I also had like a huge problem with the way Luke defined results-oriented thinking versus process-oriented thinking. I'm not going to get into that, but I do know that like a bunch of other data people jumped into. I say a bunch of other people, at least 2 other data people jumped into the thread, and they also said Luke was wrong. So I'm going to take that as a win.
On the Discord, people were pointing out the fight, and I had said, "Mommy and Daddy are fighting."
Yeah, well, we've been fighting for years, and obviously we're going to get divorced, and the divorce is your fault.
Yes, clearly. Trill Swaggets asks, in a hypothetical situation where Jefferson is playing our defense, how many yards do you think he would have in that game?
You do pretty well. I'd say that'd be like a 150-yard game for him, something like that, for sure.
Somewhere 175 to 2. I think somewhere between 175 to 2.
I could see that. I do not deny that. That's, to me, 150. I wouldn't say 150 easy. You can never get 150 easy, but to me, that's the floor essentially. Yeah, you could get below it, but 150 is like, yeah, he should at least get that. 175 would not surprise me in that scenario.
Yeah. Also, in the movie Thor says, your ancestors called it magic. But,
oh, come on.
But you call it science. I come from a land where they are one and the same. With that said, what Asgardian science could be used to improve the Vikings' defense susceptibility to chunk yardage on running back swing passes?
Trill? You are a Will Raggets parody account. Where do you have the gall?
I mean, it's an important question. I banned magic on last show, but there's a couple of questions that are like bordering on it. So that's
okay. So I've seen some of these questions, and I will admit that UMFers are extremely creative. I cannot believe you. This is incredible stuff. Why do you do this to me?
Let's go to Kenneth Allen, who asks, what do you make of Baldwin's market-derived team tiers? Although we know that Vegas has smart people working to calculate the odds, one worry I have is that they're not really in the prediction business, but the money-making business. That often overlaps because they'll lose money if their predictions are too far off, but they also make money by using their lines to elicit bets. Example, goading Cowboys fans to bet on them, even in years when they're bad. Should this matter when using their quote data?
So I have made a somewhat similar point in the past, and I have essentially been pulled aside by sharps and people who talk to sharps, and they tell me that actually this is not the case. Vegas aims to predict the score of the game, and the idea that fans are much more likely to bet on their own team, or overvalue some teams like the Patriots, right? Because of whatever mystique the Patriots have. There is evidence of that when you count the tickets, but the evidence largely disappears when you count the money, because sharps move tons of money and they do not find themselves, I would say generally speaking, susceptible to that kind of thing. And so the people who move large amounts of money, the ones that actually move lines, are much less likely, significantly less likely to be swayed by this sort of thing. And so my understanding based off of these conversations is that actually no, Vegas is attempting to get the right data here. That said, there is something off about these market-derived team tiers, and I can't put my finger on it, and it's not because of where the teams are ranked, right? So for people unfamiliar, Ben Baldwin, or Ben B. Baldwin on Twitter, is an analytics guy, and he's written a bunch of analytics articles for 538, Football Outsiders, The Athletic, and so on. And what he does is he takes the Week 14 spread as well as the advanced Week 15 spread and essentially combines it, right? Because there's some level of entanglement now. Essentially combines it to produce a market-derived power rating for each team. And so you get how a team would be favored against a league average opponent on a neutral field. And so, yeah, obviously he accounts for home and away. But to me, this one issue I have, and again, I don't have a remarkably solid understanding of everything involved here, nor do I have a well-defined reason that I don't love it. But what jumps out to me is that this does not seem like enough entanglement. I would like 3 weeks of data. I think actually it would be better or stronger if we included the previous week, even though the previous week's performances are being used to try and predict week 14, week 15. I think week 15, or rather advanced week data, is relatively weak data because there's not as much sharp movement in a week out. And the sharp movement that is a week out is typically, again, this is my understanding, so I could be wrong, is typically to find edges between books rather than to put money that a particular team will win by a certain amount of points. And so what I mean is, if you go to one casino, say Bovada, right? And you see that they have the Vikings favored by like 5.5. And you go to another casino and you see that they've got the Vikings favored by 4.5, right? There is a market edge there that you can take advantage of. And you can essentially bet the middle. And that is my understanding of what some sharps might be doing in these advanced lines. They're not fully set yet, and so there might be some differences between them. And so that I think is something to kind of keep in mind as well. So I don't know that the fidelity of this data is very good. I also don't know whether or not Baldwin has tested it, because maybe he has. Maybe it's actually quite good at predicting long-term outcomes for these teams at a certain point in the season. That'd be really cool. I don't know. But my issue with it is not the issue that was raised by Kenneth Allen, which is a totally understandable issue, but not something that I see as remarkably concerning. Now, the market-derived power ratings are not that different from DVOA, from EPA differential, from adjusted net yards per attempt differential, although that last one is a lot more harsh to the Vikings, yards per play, or any other kind of points per drive differential, or any other kind of team-level metric. It places the Vikings actually a little bit better than a lot of those at 13th, right? And a good evidence of this is that the Lions are actually favored by 2.5 at home, right? So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Oh, also another one, I think that he gives teams a 3-point advantage at home. I think that is not what the markets are doing right now. I think that home field advantage has decreased pretty significantly, and it hasn't rebounded. But again, I haven't done the world's best research on that particular question, but something to keep in mind.
Let's go to Mayo Coffee, who asks, for a Reef's Magic the Gathering corner, if Kirk Cousins were a magic card, what kind of mana would you need to would you use to cast him, and what would his abilities be?
Good Lord, this is creative. Okay, so there are. It's been a while since I played Magic the Gathering. There are 5 colors in Magic the Gathering. So you've got black, white, red, green, and blue. I think that's correct. Yeah. And they all have kind of a vibe to them, is the best way to put it. There's so much. There's so many generations of Magic the Gathering sets and decks and cards. And there's so many mechanics that you can't really isolate, like hundreds of mechanics. You can't really isolate one set of mechanics to one color, but there's tendencies, right? And there's vibes. So white is what you'd expect. It's like the color of like healing and protection magic and, defensive magic and so on, right? And, I'm simplifying here. And, there's like cooperation mechanics between cards. There's rallying mechanics between cards, whatever. Black is meant to be the opposite, right? It's like lifesteal type stuff, draining. You get your vampires, your werewolves, rats, which have like plague stuff. You've got creatures that have abilities that allow them to be unblockable and, those sorts of things, right? And so it's a kind of like a poison, toxic, death, nightmare, I'm an edgelord type stuff. Red is meant to be, like hot and fast. The cards come out quickly. They don't cost a lot. You're supposed to be able to win really quickly. Although my understanding is that modern Magic the Gathering card games last 5 turns at the most or something. They happen really fast, which is not my experience with playing. So I was never a really good player, it turns out. and it's creature focused or direct damage focused, like think fireballs and stuff like that. You'd cast a spell that damages your opponent directly, or your creature gets to play right away. Blue is meant to be for, try not to swear, annoying little brats like me. It's like meant to, like, obviously there's like the color of water and that it gets involved, and a lot of the creatures are water related, but like there's a lot of like, when you cast spells, you have the ability to counter spells. It's really annoying. You can impact your opponent's strategy in big ways. You can draw a lot of cards. It's supposed to be very cerebral, and cards are meant to be spells. And so there's all that. And then green is meant to be like slow moving, ecological, animal, plant, environment type stuff. There's a lot of creatures that are based off of like forest creatures or real world animals, like giant forest spiders and bears and stuff like that. And all of these kind of mix together. And then there's multicolor decks and stuff like that. But that's kind of the idea. Kirk Cousins, based off of that, I guess would probably be a blue deck. I'm trying to say maybe a blue-white deck. Because it is a somewhat not a risk-averse, but conservative style of play that is meant to be very kind of by the book, by the numbers. And so in that sense, you're not getting all of the trickster elements of blue decks. It's very kind of forward and up front and forthright like white decks. It's meant to be conservative, kind of like white decks are. But it is meant to be a cerebral style of play. It's meant to have a lot of cards in your hand, sort of a lot of tools in the toolbox sort of play, and it's very structured. But he is a little bit more dynamic now. So I guess he's a blue-white deck.
Beef Brewski asks, for a Reef's Magic Mike corner,
oh, come on.
in a well-regarded cameo, Michael Strahan shows off his incredible physique and wow, lascivious dance moves.
Lascivious.
Why not? In Magic Mike, this question does not require me doing an edit. Magic Mike XXL. Which Vikings player would you cast for a similar cameo in the next entry of the Magic Mike viewer?
Daniil Hunter. Next question.
From Mick, now that witchcraft, the primary focus of Norse code, has been centered from the conversation, what will you fill the minutes discussing? And what's next on the chopping block? The B corner?
Okay, first of all, nothing would make me happier than the B corner being on the chopping block. But second, this was more James getting really annoyed at my visible annoyance.
I'd had enough.
Yeah.
I snapped, and you can imagine what that took. So yeah, that's
which hasn't happened yet, as far as I know, with any of the other corners. So
no.
I don't believe that there's anything next on the chopping block. Your accusation that this is censorship is correct. You're being censored. Deal with it.
From Alex, for James and Arif's Brian Jellerson's Trans Allegory Football Hope Battery Simulation Corner.
Oh, whoa. What?
The Matrix discussion.
I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, Trans Allegory. Okay, yeah, got it. Battery, yep. Trans Allegory. Okay, got it.
Are we, the football podcast listeners who know better than to believe in the Vikings, are we Neo? Does that make Arif or James Morpheus? If so, will the beings running the simulation come after us because we are a threat to their source of energy, the Hope batteries?
Broadly, would be a correct analogy. The more you think about it, the more it falls apart, right? Because Morpheus fundamentally has faith. Now he is revealing that the world is constructed in a particular way, and that everything you believe is a lie, and that's kind of what we're attempting to say on the podcast in some weird, bizarre way that relates to the Matrix. But the problem is, Morpheus is not a rational actor. He is a true believer that defies reason and logic throughout the series in order to put his faith in a prophet, which is Neo. And as everyone knows, I have a contentious relationship with my listeners. I don't believe in any of you, and you all bother me. So it does fall apart at some point. We are skeptics. Morpheus is a believer, and there's just a fundamental difference of approach there.
Boy, I'm just getting over the whole not you being annoyed by the listeners. I think that's obvious, but
Yeah.
Don from Ohio asks, how do I keep this damn kitten out of our Christmas tree?
Oh, and he shared a little picture of the kitten, and you don't. It's part of the Christmas tree now.
Yeah, this is their tree.
Yeah.
You can get all the toys you want. It has what it needs. Let's go to the final question here from Alex, who asks, for James and Arif's anti-magic corner.
Oh, God.
Since Giselle is clearly not a witch, have we considered whether or not she is an extremely gifted roboticist, and that Tom Brady is her greatest creation?
Oh, my God.
First, we rearrange the letters of Tom Brady to Bot Radium. Clearly, Radium stands for Robotic Assistance Device for Yielding Money. Calling the robot Bot was a bit too on the nose for the extreme intelligence of Giselle, so a quick acronym gets us to Tom Brady. After Bot Tom boots up, he determines the best way to yield money for Giselle is to become the greatest quarterback of all time in the NFL. Robot Tom begins to play, and after yielding a good chunk of change, his artificial intelligence begins to advance. In fact, advances to the point where he learns to love. He and Giselle marry, and she cooks up a couple of robot children for the two of them to enjoy. Bot Tom creates an insane diet that he claims to be how he keeps his body in top playing shape. Clearly a fabrication, since a good tune-up from Giselle is all he needs. In any case, he attempts to market the diet as the TB12 diet to make more money. However, Bot Tom's base programming won't let him quit yielding money. He begins to expand to making movies as well as playing football. Eventually, his base programming makes him override Giselle's attempts to reprogram him to retire and quit yielding money. As a result, she decides to refuse his tune-up after a public, quote, divorce. Bot Tom continues to struggle with moments of his old self taking over to win close games on a Monday night and remind us that Giselle is the greatest roboticist the world has ever seen. P.S. I am tracking the Vikings' linear Super Bowl trophies and assuming an exponential decay. This guy is signing his message as Minnesota mathematician.
Yeah, okay.
I am tracking the Vikings' linear Super Bowl trophies and assuming an exponential decay with alpha of half per year. I'm also assuming that the tie results in each team receiving half of the trophy. At this point, the Browns have half a linear Super Bowl trophy. They have the half from the Vikings' first Super Bowl win last year in Week 11. And the Giants and Commanders each hold half of this year's. If the Giants can win until they play the Vikings, we can get the whole Super Bowl back. It is late, and I don't feel like seeing if we can get the other half that the Browns currently have back this year. But all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.
All right, let's take a quick look at the Browns schedule. When it's exponential decay of half, right? I assume that's pretty similar to the physics concept of half-life. I know mathematicians and physicists have a weird relationship, but let's just say it's the same.
There's nobody that's gonna be anywhere near us for there's too few games left in order to get this back.
This is Bengals, Ravens, Saints. That's an NFC team. The Commanders. That's an NFC team. So you'd have to win it in the playoffs, assuming the Saints or the Commanders make the playoffs. With the Commanders, that's a pretty tough one. The Saints, that's, I believe, an even tougher one. But it is possible that they could sneak in as the 7. So that would be what's necessary. Right? That's it, right? Because they're not going to play the Ravens, the Bengals, or the Steelers until like the actual Super Bowl, at which point if the Vikings play in the actual Super Bowl, we probably have to ditch the linear Super Bowl, right? Like it evaporates.
I disagree.
Okay, now I knew because it's a bit. I get it. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
I'll have to form I'll have to get the linear Super Bowl committee again,
right?
To make a ruling. Obviously, yes.
All right. So
Nessie was involved too from the video, but just saying.
Yeah. Okay. So Bot Tom won't let him quit yielding money. He begins to expand to making movies. His base program begins to override Giselle's attempt to reprogram him. She decides to refuse his tune-up after a public divorce. Bot Tom continues to struggle with the moments of his old self taking over to win close games. Reminds us all that Giselle is the greatest roboticist the world has ever seen. For some reason, this reminds me of Ex Machina. It very clearly reminds me of Ex Machina. But it just random, unrelated. One of the best videos I've seen on Ex Machina comes from one of my favorite YouTubers, Sean. There's a healthy discussion that he's provoked by pointing out that Wikipedia got the movie wrong, which I think is funny. Anyway, so the question is, have we considered whether or not she's an extremely gifted roboticist, right? And then there's a whole explanation. So I almost forgot the question. I'm going to say that yes, that would explain some of the weird things, but like only because the weird diet exists not to maximize Tom Brady's performance, but to provide a product to sell in order to continue maximizing money. Further, we'd have to understand that the bot knows that it cannot develop an AI that can beat the stock market, because there are AIs devoted to beating the stock market that can't. And so that would be the second thing, is right, that he cannot become an owner in order to get this money. The issue, of course, is that the bot would then have to make a very sophisticated calculation that taking less money in salary from the Patriots and I guess the Buccaneers would be worth it, because the increased marginal value that provides would allows the Patriots and the Buccaneers to sign excess players above quarterback value provided, in order to maximize his odds of winning the Super Bowl, which increases his marketability and gives him more money long term. It would have to make that very sophisticated calculation. Also, it would have to understand that Tom would not receive blowback for advertising for FTX, a known fraudulent company. Just kind of want to put that out there. But yeah, so if we assume the robot doesn't have the ability to like predict the future and only make probabilistic claims and therefore avoids the stock market, there is something to this. But I'm guessing that if this was a true profit maximizing robot, it would buy out a bunch of apartments and start renting them out for Airbnbs. That seems to be insanely profitable right now. So once he gets his seed money through the form of winning a couple of Super Bowls, he'd have to just pay attention to whether or not he does that. I guess is my thing. Yeah.
Again, I feel like all of these questions just go back to Scientology. Let's just end this. Just buying up real estate, not doing a thing with it.
Oh, yeah. Very Scientology.
Yeah. That's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. We will be back next week to discuss, hopefully, the victory over the Lions. Reef, what do you have to plug?
So over at Pro Football Network, I have written a number of articles, including that top 5 defensive coordinators piece that I mentioned, which I need to remind you, Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator of the Raiders, is not one of them. He's basically on a watch list. A good watch list, not a bad one. But I feel bad about that now. Top 5 offensive coordinators as well. Kind of a sister article paired with it. I wrote about the report that was released by the House Committee on Oversight and Reform. I'm sure I said that name wrong. On the Washington Commanders, as well as an update in that piece about the NFL's response. I am fairly harsh, which I imagine people are not surprised by. And then I also wrote a piece coming up. It'll be published Sunday before the games about the likelihood that, like Tyreek Hill or Justin Jefferson can meaningfully compete for an MVP award. So head over to profootballnetwork.com/author/ahassan to see my articles.
Well, that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Again, we'll be back later next week. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that this is not sustainable. And we'll be back next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of Pro Football Network, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.